So setup and execution for the seated leg curl, first and foremost point of importance is making sure that we understand the anatomy of the knee and how it's supposed to move in accordance with its natural mechanics. So first things first is we need to make sure that the foot and the shin, which are the things that are apparently moving, move in line with the pad. So what I mean by that is if I take the pad to the bottom and I put my knee or my leg this way, I need to make sure that I can actually move my leg in a straight front to back way instead of the natural tendency, which is to kind of roll out and be extending and flexing this way. So first things first, when you get into any one of these machines, is make sure that number one, you can take your leg and put it in here and hold it up, right, under your active control. And number two, that when you do get in there, that you roll your legs a little bit inward and move them a little bit closer so that you can move in that direction, again, that the knees are meant to be loaded and meant to be actually moving in, okay? So that's first things first. Second thing second is make sure that when you set up, that lower, or this pad is essentially in the lower half of the lower leg. So for me, this is a good spot. I generally like it on, you know, the bottom third or the bottom 50% of the lower limb segment, right? Sort of where the gastroc and the calves start to sort of narrow down just into the Achilles tendon. And then on top of that, I like this pad just above the level of the patella. So that patella, that little sesamoid bone that actually moves upward and downward. We don't want that to be smushed, but we do want this far enough away from us so that it's very easily stabilizing the lower limbs. So once we push that down, a lot of people tend to want to pull up on the handle, but instead of doing that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually push because the direction that this is providing resistance and support is directly down. And what we need in addition to that is the support that holds us back, not more, you know, downward stuff. So what I'm gonna do is as I start to initiate this rep, I'm actually gonna push into the support pad here. And as I start to curl, I'm gonna make sure that I don't lose pressure into this pad. A lot of people will start to, you know, if this pad is too high, peel away from it. So don't peel away from this, push into this the whole time, both with your hands and the tops of your thighs. And again, make sure that the direction of your legs is straight forward and backwards so that, you know, your kneecap is basically pointed toward the ceiling and parallel with the ceiling, if that's maybe a helpful sort of visualization. On top of that, everything else is pretty much tangential, you know, and secondary in terms of its consideration. What I would say in addition to those things is back position may be important, especially for those who are sensitive. What I suggest or recommend is not necessarily any one particular posture of the trunk, but just a posture that people can maintain. So some people, they start out a little bit hunched over, and as they curl, you know, they get more hunched, or maybe they sort of bear down. That's no good. If you start in kind of a neutral position, right, but as you curl, you start to like pull yourself out of the seat and start to extend more. That's also no good. Just find one particular posture. It's usually like a little bit of active extension, like a little bit of chest up, push into the pad, and then go from there. And just try to hold that posture throughout the entirety of the range. So we want to just be moving the lower limb segment. We don't really want to be moving the trunk too much. If you have a little trunk motion, that's okay, but any sort of excessive amount is going to be something that's not helpful to the motion and to contributing to the motion. So again, static trunk, push in, thighs into the pad. The pad, in terms of what's happening in the lower leg, stays where it is. If you find that the pad is rolling on the lower leg, either, you know, upward or downward, you know that you need to shift front, you know, more forward or more backward, and you do that via adjustment of the seat. So if I go this way, and maybe I can just demonstrate this. If I scoot backward and the pads move lower, and I know for a fact it's going to roll up a little bit, it starts to roll up toward the back of my knee, that's okay. That's not a super bad thing as long as it's comfortable. It may actually be helpful for the goal insofar as making a better resistance profile for the motion, meaning that as the pad gets closer to the knee, there's going to be less resistance against us. So if the pad does happen to roll up, that's perfectly fine, but what we probably want to avoid is the pad rolling down closer to the foot. So if you notice that the pad is rolling down closer to the foot, you probably need, and closer to the foot as you curl, right? So toward this part of the range, if you notice that the pad is rolling downward, what you probably know that you need to do is you probably need to shift a little bit backward, specifically because if you start to move too far forward, what will happen is the arc of your leg will move out of sync of the arc of the actual machine. So again, as a very general rule is as you curl, if the pad moves downward, you're probably going to want to move back in the seat, right? And just to maybe demonstrate this, if I move this seat too far upward and and my knees are really far forward, what will happen is the pad will start too high. It'll start sort of in the middle of the belly of the calf. It's really awkward, and then as I go down, and you can't see this in the camera, but as I pull down, it's actually starting to move sort of closer to the ankle. So, you know, you hear a lot of people talk about a lot of different things like the axis of rotation, lining it up with the knee. You don't need to worry too much about that. You just need to make sure that the motion of this thing, as you go through the range, is either up closer to the knee, meaning it's rolling up more, you know, close to the rest of your body, or it's not moving at all. Okay, so focus on essentially the pad placement here and the pad placement here, and then outside of that, you know, the postural thing, the pushing into the this for support, those things are sort of secondary considerations. And then tertiary considerations are just sort of what it looks like insofar as your alignment relative to this stuff. But to be honest, most leg curls are made fairly similarly. So once you have the pad thing in check, and once you have the support thing in check, and once you have the posture thing in check in terms of that static posture and finding where to hold it, then everything else sort of falls into place, assuming that you're controlling the rest of the motion. So that's pretty much it, and all you need to know about the seated leg curl.